Hi, everyone. I'm Linnea Seidling, Assistant Curator here at the Corning Museum of Glass. And I'm here in the Amphitheater Hot Shop with my colleague, Eric Goldschmidt, Flameworking and Properties of Glass Supervisor. This demonstration today is part of the museum's 59th annual Seminar on Glass, taking place virtually today and tomorrow. To our visitors here with us in the amphitheater, if you would like to learn more about the seminar, please visit the museum's website, cmog.org. Eric and I are here today to give further insight into certainly my favorite section of the current special exhibition in Sparkling Company, the Sparkling Dessert Table, which Kit touched on earlier today in his tour. When Kit Maxwell, our curator of early modern glass, began planning in Sparkling Company, naturally one of the first places he turned was the museum's collection. He found that the majority of the museum's holdings of 18th century British glass was tableware associated with dessert. This wasn't due to a quirk in past collecting practices, but a taste for sugar in Britain. In the 18th century, dessert became a staple of elite dining in Britain. A growing availability and fondness for sugar led to the development of new desserts, and in turn, the creation of new glass forms to hold these new foods and drinks. Any discussion of sugar and wealth in 18th century Britain is truly a discussion of slavery. The sugar that made all of these treats possible was produced on plantations in Britain's Caribbean colonies that were worked by enslaved people. In Jamaica, as Kit mentioned earlier today, Britain's most prosperous North American colony, the enslaved population outnumbered the colonists 10-1. Our goal with this section of the exhibition was to find a visually compelling way to contextualize objects from the museum's collection, as well as talk about sugar and slavery. Matt, if you could bring up the first slide for just a moment. To do this, we recreated a dessert table from a formal dinner, complete with period-accurate sweets made out of glass. We have the most amazing opportunity here at the Corning Museum of Glass to work with world-class glassmakers. Kit had the brilliant idea to collaborate with two of our flameworking demonstrators here at the museum, Eric Goldschmidt, here with us today, and Caitlin Hyde, Properties of Glass Demonstrations team lead. They conceptualized and created 15 kinds of sweets to enliven these glass vessels. They include Anise Biscuits, candy lemon peels, ice cream, fruit-shaped marzipan, grapes, among many others. I'm so excited to be here today with Eric as he shows us how he created 3 of the desserts from our sparkling dessert table. Here you go, Eric.
All righty. Thank you, Linnea. So welcome. Good morning, everyone. As Linnea mentioned, we use the flameworking process to create the majority of the desserts on the sparkling dessert table. And flameworking is essentially a style of glass blowing where we use a very focused heat source rather than a big furnace. And using a focused heat source lends flameworking really well to making fine detail work. So that is the real benefit to the process. And the fine details of the dessert items were achieved very nicely through this process. So the heat source we use nowadays for flameworking is a torch. This torch is running on natural gas and oxygen. If I turn it up as high as it can go, the temperature of that flame gets up around 4,000 Fahrenheit or about 2204 centigrade. But despite that extreme temperature, it's still perfectly comfortable to work with this. There's so much oxygen pushing its way through the torch that it really helps to focus the heat. So the heat stays very well contained within the flame. It's also getting pushed away from me the whole time. So it is a lot more comfortable than most folks might imagine. Now, I know a lot of folks watching probably don't realize there are many different types of glass out there in the world. A lot of different recipes, or actually thousands of different recipes of glass. And the glass that I'm using here is what's known as borosilicate. And it is particularly notable for the characteristic it has where it tolerates temperature change better than most other glasses. Most glasses, if you heat or cool them too quickly or just unevenly, they're going to tend to crack. This stuff holds up really well with extreme temperature change, which makes it even more ideal for some of the different details I needed to achieve to make these dessert items. So what I'm starting on here is our glass version of Syllabum. So this is actually a hollow form here. That's why I've got the hose attached to my mask and also attached to the glass. So I can blow through the hose to inflate the glass. So to get this started, I needed to start with a piece of hollow tubing. So clear glass tubing, sort of like what I've got here. And I can apply colored glass. And the form of colored glass I get for this particular, what'll be sort of a lemony syllabub, is a yellow colored glass. So I can simply take the colored glass and stripe it over the clear. That gets me to the point where I'm at now. And really the hardest parts of making these dessert items were capturing the right colors and also the right textures. We're all used to seeing glass look, well, very glassy, very shiny and transparent or reflective. And so to achieve the right dessert look, we needed to, of course, tackle the right colors, but also use some different tricks to create the right textures. So as we go along here, I'm going to show you some different textures that we applied, and I'm going to make 3 of the different dessert items that are in the exhibition. So I'm going to continue to shape the syllabub. I want to get this so it actually fits our syllabub cup, which is on the front of my table here. So I've taken a caliper measurement off the lip of the cup. That'll tell me how big a bubble I need to get it to fit. And then I'll continue to work on the texture. So Linnea is going to tell us a little bit about what syllabub actually is. And as she finishes up, I'll show you a few more steps in the process to create the glass version of it.
Yeah,
so
thanks,
Linnea.
Eric. So first, let's show everybody the glass syllabub that we featured on the dessert table in the exhibition. Thank you, Matt. Here it is for a few moments. So syllabub was a popular layered drink in England from the late 17th to about the middle of the 18th century. There were many recipes and methods for making syllabub, but they always included some type of alcohol like wine, sherry, claret, or cider, sugar, and milk or cream. Sometimes it included lemon juice, lemon zest, spices, or egg whites. The ingredients were mixed and allowed to curdle or were whipped vigorously. Either way, there was a whipped portion on the top and a liquid below. My favorite syllabub recipe that I came across in my research involved milking a cow directly into the bowl of your sugar and alcohol mixture. Or you could mimic this process by pouring warmed milk in a thin stream from a pot held high above your head. Syllabub was served in small inverted bell-shaped glasses made of porcelain or glass with 2, 1, or no handles in the case of the glass that we used here in the show. The wider opening helps support the whipped portion from collapsing into the liquid below. Back to Eric.
All right, so I've inflated the glass. It now fits the caliper measurement. Just going to round this out a little bit, and then I can continue to add some texture. So for the texture on the syllabub, used a couple of tricks here. The first is just adding a little more of the colored glass. So as I heat this up, I can simply sort of swipe it onto the bubble that I've got prepared. So once the bubble is sized properly, then I can start to add a bit more detail to it. And as long as both pieces of glass are hot enough, they sort of flow together. So it's no problem adding them to one another. So I'll add a few more stripes to create a bit more texture here. Now, if I don't have the temperatures right, if either piece of glass isn't quite hot enough, they won't fuse. And even though they may stick initially, they'll end up cracking as the glass cools. So that was another concern here in creating texture, is really being sure that I've got everything at the right temperature. And glass making is actually very similar to cooking in that respect. It's all about temperature and timing. So yet another way that making these glass desserts sort of aligns with the desserts themselves. So we'll add one more little stripe of color, and then I'll use my tweezers a little bit. I'll use actually a butter knife to create some changes in the form here. So Soften the glass up a little bit. We'll go in actually with the backside of a butter knife to add a little more shaping. And I'll blow in a little bit as I'm doing that too. So I'm blowing into the tube as I'm sort of carving in with the blade. Otherwise, the glass would start to collapse. All right, and from there, tweezers are a very important extension of the glass blower's hands for all sorts of things, but they work quite well for just sort of grabbing onto some of the material and twisting it, adding sort of that whipped creamy sort of texture. And I'm also blowing in just gently as I'm doing this too, again, just to keep the bubble from collapsing. Okay, so we've got some nice texture. And now to finish it off, to be able to fit it into a cup, I need to remove it from this tube here. So we'll use the colored glass rod as a handle. I'll attach this to the form. That doesn't need to be a perfect attachment because it's not going to be on there for long. I just need it as a handle long enough to remove the bubble from the tube here. So I'll focus the flame where I want to cut this apart. And we'll do what's known as a flame cut. So I can soften the glass where I want to cut it apart. And it's fairly thick in this spot, so it's going to take a bit of heat to get through there. As that band of material starts to soften up, I'm pulling a little bit, trying to thin it out and separate it. I'm going to blow in as well. So now I've got a very thin bit of material. I can focus the flame in one spot and blow. That pops a hole. And if I just point the flame into that hole, I can sort of follow the glass around, cut it open. And we'll just neaten that up a little bit. All right, and tweezers again. We'll melt this apart and our syllabub will be finished. Okay, so there is our glass syllabub there. Now, the next item we wanted to show you are what are known as Anise Biscuits. And maybe we could go to our next slide there, Matt. So the Anise biscuit, I'm going to grab some colored glass that I've prepared. As I looked up images of the Anise biscuit, I had found the item initially in a cookbook from the period, the Hannah Glass cookbook. And I looked up images of Anise biscuits. They looked a lot like biscotti to me. They have the same sort of texture and air bubbles to them that make me think of biscotti. So again, the big challenge is we're going to be getting the color right, getting the right brownish tones for the biscuit, and also getting the right texture. So really, truly had the details of what a baker would refer to as the crumb, that sort of balance between the air pockets and the grain. So I implemented a whole bunch of different texture tools. And as glass makers, we use all sorts of different implements as tools. Essentially, we'll use anything that just doesn't burn too quickly as a tool to shape glass or to add texture. So I have several different texturing tools. And as I'm getting going on the biscuit here, I've prepared some brown colored glass just so this shows up well for our live stream purposes. But the actual aniseed biscuits that we put in the exhibition were made from clear glass. And my colleague, Caitlin Hyde, in addition to being a very skilled glassmaker, is skilled in many other artistic endeavors, including painting. So we were very fortunate that Caitlin, in times when we weren't able to really use the right colored glasses, if we couldn't find the right colors, she was able to paint things to give us the right effect that we needed, the right colors and color combinations. So that's what we ended up doing with the biscuits that are in the exhibition, trying to get the most accurate possible color representations. So anywhere we could use colored glass, we went with colored glass, but there were many occasions where we simply couldn't get the right colors just in glass. So we chose to go the direction of painting. All right, so I've set up sort of the rough form of the biscuit. But as I mentioned, texture is crucial to really make these look as realistic as possible. So now that I've got that rough shape set up, we'll maybe touch that up just a little bit more here. So to add texture, got a few different tools to work with here. So got a few different metal tools. The points have different sizes and shapes to them. So I'll start with the widest shape here. So I focus the flame just on one side at a time. I just want to soften up the surface. I don't want to soften this all the way through. I've got the overall form that I want. So I've got to really control temperature to control form. If I overheat things, the indentations I put in start to melt away. The overall form will start to change. So it's important to heat things very accurately. So just sort of heating the face of the form. We'll add a few of those larger indentations and I'll sort of step it down to a smaller size as I go along here. And I found I had to work in this sort of an order, starting with the biggest indentations and then working to the smallest ones. If I work in the opposite order, make the small ones first, by the time I'm finishing the biggest ones, I've heated the glass so much, the smallest indentations start to disappear. They melt right in and we lose the texture. So it had to be ordered properly to get the right effect. And we'll go down one more size. So I went through this same order of process to make the biscuits that got painted for the show. But after doing all the shaping and adding the indentations, we then sandblasted the glass. So sprayed very fine bits of silicon carbide at high pressure against the glass. That abrades the surface of the glass, gives it sort of a matte finish. And when it has that rough surface, it holds paint just fine. So we achieved a couple of effects that way. We were able to get the paint to stick and also get the nice matte finish that we wanted. So these things didn't look too glassy. And then the final bit of texture, I've got this little plate here that has a bunch of pins sticking up out of it. Soften this just enough. And I'll use my paddle here to sort of press the glass against those pins to really put a nice bit of texture in there. We'll flip to the other side. I'll do that one more time. Okay, so now we've got quite a bit of texture on there. So maybe we could zoom in on that with our cameras. All right, so the clear versions after sandblasting look like this. And then of course, after painting. We have even more depth from the addition of a few layers of paint on there. So those are the Anise Biscuits. And then the next piece we wanted to show you guys were Apricot Knots made from apricot paste. So if we could bring up that slide, please, Matt. All right. So as I was looking up some different period appropriate foods, I found a couple recipes for apricot knots. And one was sort of a cakey dessert item that had some apricot jam sort of smothered on the top of it. The other was made from apricot paste and made into sort of a knot shape. And to recreate these ones that were the paste made into the knot shape, again, the concerns are color and texture. So we needed the color to look as accurate as possible. And we also wanted the sort of sugary texture on there. That presented a unique problem. We couldn't paint these because if I were to paint these, I would end up painting over the crushed colored glass that's been added for that sugary texture. So we had to figure out the right combination of colored glasses to get that good apricot look. So what I combined was these two colors here, one sort of orangey, the other a little more of an amber. Now, to create colored glass, different metal oxides and different elements from the Earth's crust are melted together to create the colored glass. There's a chemical reaction that occurs when those ingredients are hot enough for long enough. And that being the case, they don't mix like paints do. If you take a yellow glass and a blue glass and try to mix them together, you're not necessarily going to get green. You might wind up with red because there'd be a chemical reaction that all of a sudden gets you an entirely different color. So to combine the colored glasses for the effect I needed, I took some of the orange colored glass and striped it over a rod of clear glass. These are the orange stripes back here. And then I laid some of this more amber tone over the top of that. So by layering those, since they are transparent, we get sort of a blend of colors that gave us the apricot color we needed. So once I built up those layers of color, I heat the glass and stretch it to the diameter I need. And then from there, I can continue to shape the glass into the different parts for the knot. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll start to dive in on some of the shaping, do the bending. And Linnea, I believe, wants to tell us a little something more about apricot knots and about fruit.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So as you mentioned, this recipe came from a period cookbook. And so it came from an 18th century cookbook, The Complete Confectioner, or The Whole Art of Confectionery Made Plain and Easy by Hannah Glass, as Eric mentioned. The edition we consulted was published in 1742. I'm going to read out the recipe for apricot paste for us. Boil some apricots that are full ripe to a pulp and rub the fine of it through a sieve. To every pound of pulp, take 1 pound, 2 ounces of fine sugar, beaten to a very fine powder. Heat well your paste, and by degrees, put in your sugar. When all is in, give it a thorough heat over the fire. Take care not to let it boil. Then take it off and scrape it all to one side of the pan. Let it cool a little, then lay it out on plates in what form you please. Then dust them and put them into a stove to dry. So fruits and fruit-based desserts on your dessert table was quite a marker of wealth. Growing warm weather fruits like apricots or citrus fruits in England at this time was difficult and expensive. One had the expense of importing the plants, employing a skilled staff, and building a structure to provide heat for the plants during the colder months. These structures, like walled gardens or orangeries, captured heat from the sun and were the precursors to modern greenhouses. Orangeries had large south-facing windows that exploited the properties of glass to let sunlight in and trap in heat. And we'll go back to Eric.
All right, so just shaping this up into 1/2 of the knot. So I've bent the glass, created a little bit of a loop. and set this up in an angle. So that gets me half of the knot. Then to finish actually shaping the knot, I let that cool, and I can take two parts, slide them together almost like puzzle pieces. And from there, I want to soften that up, get it formed into more of the finished form here. Now, these pieces of glass, as you noticed, I could handle them. They're just room temperature. So if I warm them too quickly, there's always a chance they could crack. If this were any other glass aside from borosilicate, I would be extremely worried about them cracking. But even with borosilicate, it's not completely impervious. So I'm sort of waving the flame over them, easing some heat in. And you're going to notice the color of the glass changing a bit as it warms up. It goes to, with these particular colored glasses, sort of a darker orange, while it's not quite molten, but just warming up. Then as it really gets molten and soft, it starts to glow orangey. So that's what we're starting to see in certain areas now. So now that I've got this warmed in safely, I can be more aggressive with the heating. I don't have to worry about things cracking at this point. It's way too hot for that to be an issue. And we'll just use the paddle, sort of ease this into that final knot shape. All right, so that gets us our knot shape. And then to add the sugary texture, I use some pieces of crushed clear glass. And when we crush up glass in this sort of a form, we refer to it as frit, F-R-I-T. You can get different colored glasses in this frit form, but for something that looks like sugar, this already looks like sugar just on its own. So it's ideal for this purpose. So I can just sort of warm the apricot knot, sprinkle some of those chunks of frit, get those to fuse on, but we want some different textures of the sugared look. So I've got some finer bits of frit here as well. For the finer ones, if I just warm the surface, I can just sprinkle that on and it sticks pretty well. And we'll fire that in there, a little extra heat to really make sure everything fuses. So that gets us our apricot knot. And we'll maybe add a little more of the bigger grains here, just to finish it off. And that gives you some idea of what went into some of creating our sparkling dessert table. So we hope you all enjoy the rest of seminar. We appreciate you all joining us. And yeah, we hope you have a very sweet rest of your experience with the conference. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Linnea, for working with me on the presentation here.
Of course, Eric. Thanks so much.